flight attendants, please prepare for takeoff.
Stolen by Ehlers to Wheeler, back to Ehlers, scores!
Kyle Connor has the Midas touch right now.
And another outstanding stop by Connor Hellebuyck.
Check the shoot, score! Oh, what a slick move by Mark Scheifele.
Ground Control, the official podcast of the Winnipeg Jets, hosted by Jets TV.
Welcome to Ground Control, the official podcast of the Winnipeg Jets. This is episode 101. We've moved into the new century, joined here by Jets TV's Mitchell Clinton and 680 CJOB's Paul Edmonds. Gentlemen, the Winnipeg Jets coming off a 3-game week, a little bit of a wrinkle, obviously, too, with the Vancouver Canucks COVID situation. So let's recap the week here. 5-1 win over Calgary on Monday, a 3-1 loss to Toronto here at Bell NTS Place on Wednesday. Followed that by a Friday 2-1 shootout loss to the Toronto Maple Leafs. But, by all intents and purposes, Friday's game was not so bad. I mean, you just lose the skills competition, as Paul likes to put it. Mitch, what did you just see from the team this week, and how did their game improve from Wednesday to Friday?
Well, if you kind of go back to the Calgary game, it's a real solid victory in Calgary that had some trickery. I mean, there was no real indication from Paul Maurice in warm-up or anything that he'd be flipping the lines the way that he did, putting Scheifele with Ehlers and Connor, then Dubois with Wheeler and Stastny. Clearly paid off in a big way that game. That first line with Scheifele, combines for 8 points. Dubois, Wheeler, Stastny also find the score sheet. So it's not too often you find instant chemistry like that. Then 2 frustrating losses to the Maple Leafs in that clearly the Jets didn't like their first period on Wednesday, getting outshot 14-6 and you're down 2-0. But really after that, regulation time for the final 2 periods there and then 3 periods on Friday, the Jets and Leafs are tied at 2. If you go over the course of those 5 periods, and Toronto gets the extra point, as you mentioned, Tyler, in the shootout. I think that 2-game set showed us a couple of things. One, the Jets are a team that can reduce some high danger chances given up. Listen, like a team like Toronto is going to generate chances. They just have too much skill to not do that. It's similar with the Jets. They're going to be able to generate. But if you're Winnipeg, having the Lowry line outscore the Matthews line 1-0 on Friday at even strength, you're going to take that all day. It's also a performance the Jets can have in their back pocket. Like overall, I look at the Maple Leafs and Jets this season series so far. You have 6 games, 2 regulation wins each, then 2 games decided by 1 break either way, 1 in overtime, and then the skills competition that we saw on Friday. So when Andrew Copp says after the game on Friday, we're confident in our team, especially in this matchup against the Maple Leafs, you have to believe him. So certainly if you're Winnipeg, you'd prefer to have won all your games, of course, but I think those 2 games against Toronto were building blocks.
Well, the penalty kill has been on full display these last few games here, including the kill in overtime against Toronto to stretch it to a shootout. Just what have you seen from the penalty kill? They're sitting 13th in the National Hockey League, but I think if you look over the last 10, 15 games, they'd be ranked a lot higher than that.
Tyler, the first thing that I would say about the penalty kill is, and while it is improved and it looks real good and it should be applauded, I think Winnipeg's done a real good job over the last couple of years of being more disciplined and thus taking less penalties and then going on to the penalty kill and being time short more. So that's number one. So then if you're reducing the number of times that you are time short, then you can really concentrate your efforts into those 2 or 3 or maybe 4 times that you are shorthanded and on the penalty kill. When it gets to it, we can throw out a bunch of numbers. I mean, overall, in the last 5 games, 81% effective at 13 of 16. Overall this year at 80%, 14th right now as we enter the new week. And it just looks like it's trending in the right direction. And Paul Maurice has always talked about, okay, given his druthers on specialty teams, would you rather have a killer power play or a real solid stellar penalty kill? And he would take the latter. Because if you can kill penalties now, and then as you start to ramp up the regular season toward the last, 18 games, and then that fight for that playoff spot or the jockeying for position in playoff spots, and then into the playoffs, that's going to serve you well. But I think what's happened here is there's an internal competition going on with the guys that play on the penalty kill. And that's both forwards and defensemen. And everybody seems to have a piece of it. You go through all of the guys, all of the players on the Jets that have had penalty kill duty this year, and it's a long list. And you're even now including players like Logan Stanley, who got some time on Friday night on the penalty kill. So when you have a stable, as Paul Maurice does, of the veterans that are now working some of the younger guys in as well, and I wouldn't call even Mason Appleton a rookie penalty killer anymore. He's had a few years at trying to adapt his skill and transfer his skill as an offensive player to being a good defensive player. So there's a number of players that the Winnipeg Jets count on in that role. Kopp, Lowry, Lewis, Thompson, Morrissey, Pionk, Forbert. And I think part of that is too, that a lot of these players that play with that pride, that really get a jazz, and the team gets uplifted when you kill off a penalty, and you get some momentum off of it as well. There is that propensity to really kind of get into that lane with your stick and to be able to shot block as well. And that's the intestinal fortitude part, is if you want to kill penalties in the way the Winnipeg Jets have been structured, you're going to have to get in some shot lanes and take one off the shin pads, off the ankle, off the toe, off your hand, wrist, hip, whatever it is. And then the last part of it, guys, simply is you've got the best goaltender in the league. And that's the starting point for a really good penalty kill. And I didn't start there purposely, because everything outside of that has been very good and trending the right direction for the Winnipeg Jets this year. So there's a lot to like about the penalty kill, and there's a lot to break down about it, but it's been very good overall. And I look for it to climb into the top 10 probably in the next couple of weeks.
One of the men who takes tremendous pride in his ability to kill penalties is Andrew Copp. He scored his 12th goal of the season on Friday night. That was Winnipeg's lone goal in the 2-1 shootout loss. 12 goals, and aided by the 4-goal performance back in Vancouver a few weeks ago. Mitchell, what has Andrew Copp been able to do just all over the ice that's allowed him to A, have success, and B, just be trusted in every fashion by Paul Maurice?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost at the point of what more can you say? So I was thinking about this the other day, Friday, when Kopp scored, like you mentioned, his 12th, and then tied his career high for points in a season with 28 in about 44 less games, I think it worked out to be. So I was trying to think of a different way to kind of think about, he seems to be involved a lot. So Kopp recorded his 100th career point on January 9th, 2020 against Boston, which feels like 100 years ago. I remember him after that game being asked about, reaching that 100 career point milestone. He said, let's hope the next 100 come faster than that. You can tell he's a motivated guy. He always has been. So I believe at that point he had 100 points in about 330 games. So roughly 0.3 points per game. Now, over the course of the 64 games after that, he has 38 points, which is 0.6 points per game. So no wonder, his output's been so noticeable. It's literally double what it was. So obviously this isn't something that comes overnight. He works tirelessly at his offensive game and still doesn't cheat the game to create offense. We just talked about the penalty kill. There's a reason he's a really good penalty killer. He's so solid in his defensive zone, makes great reads, good stick, all those things that you would love at 5-on-5. He does on the penalty kill. And then he also gets some power play time as well, as I would say a reward for the work that he does. However, this is the same guy that's on the ice before every single morning skate, working on pucks off the wall with Mark Scheifele, turning out of those plays and looking for the next play. He's always working on those little things so that when the time comes in the game, he's ready to take advantage of those opportunities. So he's got points in 3 of Winnipeg's last 4 games. It just seems to be getting better and better each time out.
That'll wrap it up for us here on Ground Control, but the episode is far from over. Next up, we have Jamie Thomas chatting with TSN insider Frank Seravalli, and then a little later, I sit down over Zoom with MooseTV's Austin Siragusa. He'll give you an update on all the Jets prospects and how the Moose are doing this season, so be sure to stick around for those. Enjoy.
Hi, this is Blake Wheeler, and you're listening to Ground Control, the official podcast of the Winnipeg Jets.
Frank, I guess another trade center is on the horizon. What are the pros and cons of that long day for you?
I'm not sure. Aside from the chance to be part of the coverage, I'm not sure there's a whole ton of pros. It's a lot of, and this year in particular, it's going to be a lot of juggling. Like I'm not a good juggler. I don't have any special talents, nothing that I can show. Certainly as a 250-pound man for 10 hours on television, I guess I got to get good at something else. But this is going to be a really interesting deadline. I think this is a deadline unlike any other. Certainly not since I've been in this business. And there's so many factors in play. Like, it just seems to be such a difficult time to make trades. You know, not only are we dealing with a pandemic and quarantines and this flat cap, but also the expansion draft. Like, did it have to be this year? It's making things really difficult to conduct transactions. And so we're hoping that we see, you know, a number of names on our trade bait board go, but if not, you know, we say all the time, we don't make the news, we just report on it.
How complicated has making the trade board been for, or trade bait board been for you this year?
I think it's just been complicated in terms of impact, right? Like, you know, I was just saying, we don't make the news, we just report it. And like, I want there to be bigger names, splashier names out there. And I think that's the real thing that's missing from it this year, is just, you know, yes, David Savard is a fantastic top 4 defenseman. And, you know, everyone wonders what Taylor Hall has left. And Kyle Palmieri has been one of the most consistent goal scorers. But once you start to get past some of those names, you're really taking a big dive in terms of real impact that you can bet on your team. And so I think that's what's missing. And that has made it difficult, because you always want something that grabs people's attention and headlines, but at the same time, you can't make it up either. So, you know, that's been the tough part.
What is Nashville's push for the playoff spot right now really done to the idea that Matthias Ekholm and Granlund to be on the move on the trade deadline?
Yeah, I think that has thrown a big wrench into it. And I think there's another team too, the Arizona Coyotes. Like, they're now right there in that 4 spot in the West. And so those were 2 teams, when you look at the board, that we were kind of really counting on to be sellers. And now when you add into the mix that a guy like Matthias Ekholm, for instance, has an extra year left, and in a normal year, you'd be saying, man, it'd be great to get 2 playoff runs out of Matthias Ekholm. And instead, it's, geez, now we got to protect this guy. And hey, Seattle, what's it going to cost us to protect him and another guy that we have in our top 4? And so then they find out from Seattle that that's a really expensive price. And so all of a sudden, that makes it really difficult. So those guys slide down the board, but then you're also thinking with Nashville, for instance, you know, is this team really going to be beating Tampa, Carolina, Florida in a 7-game series? And can they beat 2 of those in a 7-game series? So you'd think that logic would prevail there, but I could see totally it makes sense to keep Matthias Ekholm until after the expansion draft if you're intent on moving him, because teams don't want to protect him. You know, maybe a Granlund moves and that makes sense, but I could see Ekholm sliding down a bit on the board.
How strange is it not to have a member of the Winnipeg Jets on your trade bait board?
Not that strange. You know, the Jets have been so good and so consistent now for the last number of years. And, you know, I think that's the one thing about this sport, is that it's pretty cyclical, right? Like, you know, you have these ebbs and flows with your salary cap, and sometimes that's just the nature of the beast. And I think the Jets have done such a good job of, you know, now they're in this window that they can really be competitive for a long time. Like, so many guys are locked up on longer term deals. And, you know, and Nick Ehlers, for instance, you know, what a revelation he's been this season to the rest of the North. And he's under contract for a long time at a reasonable number. And so not only can the Jets be in a position where they can add now, but they're in a position where they're going to have some guys coming up in the offseason that, you know, provides a little bit more salary cap flexibility where they can be aggressive then too. And so it really makes it an exciting time to be a Jets fan.
With Nathan Beaulieu, the news that Nathan Beaulieu is lost for the rest of the season, do you think Kevin Cheveldayoff is in any way trying to push for another defenseman at this point?
Yeah, I'd be really surprised if the Jets don't go out and get a defenseman. I think the question is, who is it? And what's the price that the Jets are willing to pay? I mean, Beaulieu adds some more flexibility cap-wise. And, you know, so you go down the list, you know, and you say, well, does a Savard make sense? And then you're dealing, you know, you're starting to canvas around the entire league. You're saying, you know, what about a situation in Anaheim? I'm sure that they'd be listening on some of their defensemen as well. Does a Josh Manson make sense? Does Josh Manson have Winnipeg on his no trade list? So there's a lot of things to consider. But I'd be very surprised if, you know, 3 p.m. passes on April 12th, and between now and then the Jets don't add a defenseman.
The last one for you, and this is kind of like a human related thing with what's going on in Vancouver. I mean, first and foremost, we think about their health and long-term health. Do you see the schedule being affected in the impact where they're using up that buffer week, or does Vancouver play less than 56 games, Frank?
The question for me, first and foremost, before you can answer those other ones is,
Yeah.
when is Vancouver going to be healthy enough to play again?
Right.
And talking to some people there, they think it's 3 weeks from now. So that's a tough spot. All of a sudden, you're dealing with late April for a season that was supposed to end on May 8th. And we've already eaten into that buffer week. May 11th is the longest the NHL has gone so far. And the NHL has remained steadfast to this point on trying to get in all 56 games for each team in the North. But I think the priority will need to shift if Vancouver's out for that long. They're already comfortable with the idea of eating into that buffer week a little bit more and having the 3 U.S. divisions start their playoff series and have, the North Division finish out their slate. But I think you have to think about dealing with games with playoff implications first, meaning, rather than worry about rescheduling games for Vancouver against Calgary, 2 teams that are likely going to be out of the mix, get the Vancouver games back on the schedule against teams that are in the playoff mix, like the Jets, for instance, so that the Jets are dealing with an equal and level playing field, and then worry about those other games. And I think if push needs to come to shove there, then you have Calgary and Vancouver dealing with lottery implications on a points percentage basis. So
Right.
I think there's an easy way to prioritize that. Whether the NHL is okay with that standard of having some teams in the division not having played the full 56 game slate, that remains to be seen, because to this point, they've really tried to put the hammer down and say, we want everyone playing 56. I just don't know if Vancouver really is out for 3 weeks, if it's even realistic.
Well, I'll be thinking of you on Trade Center. Hoping you all, wishing you all the best. Don't come up with anything new. You don't need to. There's no need for that
we'll
stuff.
See. Yeah, we got 10 hours to fill, and I'm glad that's why James Duffy is there, and we're on the trade breakers panel, because they only come to us if there's news. So
appreciate it, Frank. All the best.
Thanks, Jamie. Take care.
Shop where the players shop. Jets Gear and TrueNorthShop.com are your authentic team stores. Make sure to stock up on all your favorite Winnipeg Jets and Manitoba Moose merchandise today. Visit one of the 5 Jets Gear locations or shop online at TrueNorthShop.com.
Joined here on the Ground Control podcast by the face of MooseTV and the behind-the-scenes man as well, Austin Siragusa. Austin, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tyler. It's a blast to finally be on this podcast.
Excellent. Well, happy to have you as always. All right, so we're here obviously to talk about the Manitoba Moose. Their season has started, obviously. Maybe just a quick update on where things are at with the Manitoba Moose. Obviously, right now they're sitting at 8-10-2 with 18 points, and that's 1 point back of third place in that Canadian division. Just what have you seen from the team this year?
Yeah, I mean, well, the Canadian division overall, it's been such a logjam really for even second place. The team that's really running away with it right now has been the Laval Rocket, who the Moose just faced here on Tuesday a little while ago. So it's been a heck of a season for the Moose. They start out at Bell MTS Place with a 4-game series against the Toronto Marlies, then head out for a really tough road trip where they played 8 games in just under 2 weeks. So not a whole lot of time to practice or really get to know the guys on the ice. It's just game after game after game, and then they come back to Winnipeg after that 2-week road trip to start off a 17 homestand at Bell MTS Iceplex. So it's really been a season unlike any other, but it's so good for those players. Some of the high end Winnipeg Jets prospects, David Gustafson, Cole Perfetti, Christian Vesalin, just to be playing those top line minutes rather than, being with the Winnipeg Jets taxi squad where they're not really getting into a whole lot of game scenarios. So it's definitely been great in terms of development. And, the Belleville Senators coming in here on Wednesday of next week. So another good test for Manitoba is ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned a few of those names there, and that's what we're going to talk about here. We're going to run down the list. We'll start with Cole Perfetti, obviously the 10th overall pick in this year's draft. In a normal circumstance year, this would probably not be where he is at the current moment, but he seems to have seized an opportunity. What's his play been like so far this season?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, most 19 or rookies in the NHL, if they get sent down by the NHL club, they're going back to junior in Cole's place, the OHL. but with the OHL not up and running, he's been playing with the AHL and the Manitoba Moose, and he's really made the most of that opportunity. 10 points in 20 games for a 19-year-old who's playing his first season of pro hockey is actually pretty incredible when you think about it. In talking to Cole around the rink, he found out very fast that this is not the same as junior. You know what I mean? Like, the guys are a lot bigger, the game's a lot faster. And it's tougher to make some of those plays that maybe he was able to make in junior, but he's made that adjustment very well. 10 points is tied for second on the Manitoba Moose as well. So for a 19-year-old being able to, slide into an opportunity in a place where he's not really too familiar with the systems and to be producing at that level, it's pretty strong. And his hockey IQ too. I mean, I've talked to Moose head coach Pascal Vincent about that a couple of times too. He for a 19-year-old, you can already see that the wheels are starting to turn in his brain about, making that next player, making that seam pass. He's really able to sort of see the ice very well, and that's going to be probably pretty beneficial for him as he continues to develop in the AHL and hopefully in the NHL one day too. But, I'd say I'm pretty surprised with Cole, and I'm sure the Moose coaching staff and some of the other players have to be as well.
You mentioned these guys off the top as well, Christian Vesalin and David Gustafson. They were sent down to the Moose around 3 weeks ago and have gotten some game action since then and have found the back of the net too. What have you seen from those two players as they try and take the next step?
Absolutely. David and Christian, who started off the season, with the Winnipeg Jets and were placed on a taxi squad, to finally be back here in the AHL with the Moose, a place where both those guys spent a good chunk of the year last year. Well, especially in Christian's case, maybe not in David's case. But regardless, it's great for those guys to be down here playing those top line minutes. And even in that Laval series, we did see a line combo that we saw at the end of last season where those two players played with Christian Reichel, and it was successful. It's almost like the chemistry just returned right away. But yeah, David, I mean, he's got 10 points in 10 games. I mean, you don't need to be a statistician to know that those are pretty solid numbers. Exactly. Right. So he's been able to just really click with whoever he's been playing with, whether it's, Christian Reichel, Nathan Todd, Skylar McKenzie, who he was playing with last game. He's able to sort of make those opportunities, whether it's, scoring goals or setting up some goals. That one goal he did score against Laval a little earlier on in that this week, or last week rather, where he scored with, I think it was 0.2 seconds left on the clock. It just shows how clutch he can be in those moments, and the coaching staff trusts him to be on the ice in those dire moments. So that does well for his confidence too. And then Christian as well. He's only gotten in 6 games. He's been dealing with a little bit of an injury when he was sent down to the Moose, but in those 6 games, he's also put up 5 points too, including his first goal on the power play, which was a fantastic pass from Cole Perfetti to set that up too. So, it's a lot of Winnipeg Jets prospects playing down here for the Moose, and they're getting their opportunities, and the more opportunities they get, the more they're going to bury them. And that's going to be huge for their confidence going forward.
Obviously, lots of prospects in the pool for the Winnipeg Jets down at the Manitoba Moose. But the final one we're going to talk about here is Dylan Sandberg. Obviously, he coming into this year's training camp, a very intriguing prospect, signed his pro deal back last year and is making his jump to professional hockey. How has he handled that situation?
Yeah, he's a big guy out there. You know what I mean? Like, he doesn't look like he's too far out of place when going into the corners with some of those other tough or top AHL or NHL prospects for the other teams. But he's a big guy, and he's able to throw his weight around. We've seen that a little bit. He's not, the sort of the offensive defenseman type that we might see in, say, Ville Heinola, but he is very, poised and confident in the back end, and that will of course in turn generate some chances as well. He did grab his first pro assist not too long ago in another game, and just getting points on the board is huge for him as well, but that's obviously not the main part of his game. He's just trying to be confident in the back end and then generate some other chances off that. And he's been paired with Jonathan Kovacevic for a good chunk of this year as well. Jonathan is another player who's signed by the Winnipeg Jets, developing in the AHL, and he's, you're not going to say he's an older guy to sort of learn the pro game off of, but he has a full year of AHL experience from last year, and playing with guys like Cam Schilling and Peter Stojkovic and some of those other guys, Jimmy Olney too, right? So he can already pass some of that information along to Dylan Sandberg, and that's going to be so huge for him just to learn the systems from a guy like Johnny. And it's just builds chemistry too already early on, which is also great for Dylan. And he's able, like I said, able to throw his body around. He had a massive hit against one of the Laval players, a clean hit, but a heavy hit into the boards. But he's learning the pro game very well, and it's great for his confidence too.
We could go down the list of all the different Jets prospects the Moose are housing this year, but let's talk about the surprises. I feel like every season there's one or two players that really stand out that when you started the season, you didn't really expect for them to be where they ended up. And so those two players for me this year, just from reading your Twitter account and watching the game highlights, is Jeff Malott and Nathan Todd. But who else has surprised you this year? And as for Todd and Malott, what has made them successful?
Yeah, for Nathan Todd, I mean, he spent a little bit of time here with the Moose last year, probably about 10 to 15 games last year, and only generated a goal and a couple of assists. So he was bouncing back between the ECHL and the AHL a little bit. He also spent some time with Belleville and the Senators too. But I think from what Pascal Vincent, the head coach of the Moose, said, he just came in a little bit faster, a little bit bigger, and the shots seem to be a little bit stronger as well. And that really has been proven on the score sheet with 16 points in 20 games. At one point on that road trip, he led the entire American Hockey League in points. So he's been able to generate those opportunities. He's also had CJ Cease at center for a good chunk of that too. And CJ's also got 9 points in 20 games, and he's been able to just feed Nathan those pucks. He hasn't had as many points in recent games as of late. I mean, you go against teams like Laval and Stockton. Laval, like I said, is the best team in the Canadian division. Arguably one of the top teams in the AHL right now. It's tough to tell, obviously, because there's no outer division play. But when you look at it on paper, Laval is definitely one of the better teams. But it's tough for Nathan to generate those points. But the points he did generate in the beginning of the season were huge. Jeff Malott, another guy you mentioned. I mean, he's playing in his rookie season too. Was signed from Cornell University in the offseason. And he also has been a pleasant surprise too. 10 points, 8 goals in 18 games as well. And that also led rookies for a time earlier on this year too. So 2 really pleasant surprises. Another guy also, I want to mention is Declan Chisholm, who also signed his first contract with the Winnipeg Jets not too long ago. A younger guy, a little bit of a smaller guy as well, but he's, like I said, learning from guys like Jimmy Olney, Johnny Kovacevic, just to learn how to, not be afraid going into corners or making sure that you make that first pass tape to tape. He's got a lot of guys to learn from. He's been also a pleasant surprise for me.
Obviously, with COVID, everything is different this season. And one of those things that's glaringly different for you guys this year is you're playing pretty much all of your home games out of Bell MTS Iceplex. What's that been like? I know there had to be some transformation and some changes to the rink. Just how has that gone?
Honestly, it's been incredible. I mean, to start off the season at Bell MTS Place and then go on the road for, like I said, 2 weeks, that's not a lot of time to turn around, the Bell MTS Iceplex into a professional hockey rink. But, hats off to the people in, the Bell MTS Iceplex operations staff that managed to do it. We got a whole new set of glass in here. It's pro glass now. The Colton was able to, make sure that we can run AHL TV games in here. They're Colin Peterson, Andrew Ferretti, and, a whole cast of other, Moose Productions people are up in the foyer, basically running the games every game. And it's really incredible to see how it's all sort of come together, but it's also great for the players too. These are facilities they're familiar with, and, in some aspects a little better than the facilities that Bell MTS plays for this team. They have, hot tubs, cold tubs, a bunch of medical beds they can use too. So it's definitely different. You know what I mean? It's definitely different compared to playing at Bell MTS Place and some of those other buildings on the road, but it's home for the Moose. You know what I mean? It's their practice facility, and now it's also their game facility, and it's been fantastic. Like I said, I don't think I can give enough credit, and the players and staff can't either, just to the Bell MTS Iceplex operations team, just to see how fantastic of a job they've done out here. And it's really special.
Before we wrap things up, I'll give you a chance to promote yourself. Where can fans follow you on Twitter? What's your handle? And how can Moose fans and Jets fans check out the Manitoba Moose on TV or the radio?
Yeah, Goose on the Moose on Twitter. I like to try and keep things as engaged as possible. There's lots of fun stuff going on down here and all the practices and games. So I like to keep people up to date on that. And then as for games and stuff, there's lots of great ways, moosehockey.com/listen live, cjob.com/sports, or the best way, ahltv.com, get yourself a subscription there. It's plenty of great ways to follow along. But I mean, being able to see the Jets prospects in action is great on ahltv.com. They welcome the Belleville Senators on April 7th, Wednesday at 6:00. The Moose, I think, outscored Belleville last time 9-3 in their 2-game series they played. So looking forward to a lot of offense. Hopefully Moose, they kick off that 4-game series with Belleville on Wednesday.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me here on the Ground Control Podcast, the official podcast of the Winnipeg Jets. On behalf of myself, Jamie Thomas, Paul Edmonds, Mitchell Clinton, and our guest, and of course, Austin Siragusa, thank you so much for joining us. Have a good one.
This is Big Ground Control, the official podcast of the Winnipeg Jets, hosted by Jets TV. For Jets news, videos, and more, head to winnipegjets.com.